Be strong.
He reached into his coat pocket, preparing to pull out something. It was his familiar staff. He held it with both hands and placed it on the ground, pressing it with great force. Everyone was surprised by his sudden action. "Li Han, what are you planning to do?" Li Han remained silent, looking mysterious. He began to raise his hands in preparation for some magic ritual. Lightning began to appear from his hands and fly into the air. He was using his magical power to summon a spirit. "Oh spirit, call rain and lightning to me." Even though he was the guardian of the once collapsed Bell Tower Kingdom, those who often traveled the sea still haunted his name. Adenard saw the magical scene before his eyes and kept thinking, the spell used to summon a spirit shows the proficiency and level of that spirit. Would Wardanas use such a long spell? So how powerful will this spirit be? At this time, Wardanas still focused on the summoning rituals. He began to recite very long spells to summon the spirit. "I, the one who made a contract with you, have the right to call you. Appear." He finished his spell as the tip of the staff lit up, streaks of lightning beginning to appear around it. This light gradually forms streaks of light, which create the shape of a flower petal using lightning. Petals began to appear. From one petal and more appeared. A total of 5 petals made of lightning formed from Wardanas' staff and placed completely in his 2 hands. This thing then disappeared, leaving only a ball curled up from the lightning just now, floating in Wardanas' hand. Wardanas was surprised by its appearance after the final summoning ritual was completed, just as small as a ball of lightning. He began to feel confused. The glue was stiff and unacceptable. "What's wrong? I thought it was going to be some kind of powerful spirit." His friend started to look down on the spirit that had just been summoned. "He was so small, haha. Why did you only appear partially?" Wardanas bewilderedly asked the lightning spirit. "Have you forgotten? I'm stuck somewhere because of you." "Even so, this is too small," Wardanas sighed. "If you always have a reason to hide when I need you, how can I trust you anymore?" Wardanas's face darkened in disappointment, and he said. Wardanas's attitude made the lightning spirit extremely uncomfortable. He secretly thought that he could shock the arrogant and illogical old men to death if he wanted at any time, pulling the spirit to show a tense expression. "There is an enemy, someone is hiding." The spirit sent a warning to its master Wardanas. Wardanas felt a bit scared when he heard it. "I will hide in the darkness." Wardanas carefully looked around in case of danger. "He was here, I didn't see anything nearby." But what Wardanas did not expect was that cracks began to appear under his feet, on the ground, and the earth began to move. Below him, the thunder spirit quickly alerted its owner, but the monsters acted too quickly. They began to rise from the ground. Giant moving trees and tendrils appeared on the ground, dynamic. Wardanas had not yet had time to react to the sudden change before his eyes. He had no prior preparations. It immediately used its tendril power to wrap around the legs of the nearby students. The students screamed in terror. That monster was probably capable of walking underground. Thunder miscellaneous speak. Probably the magician in this place did something unnecessary, for example giving it a skill, pulling the spirit to say what it thought to Wardanas. He stood to the side and observed carefully and guarded against danger. On one side, his friends were hung upside down by the tendrils. The monster's magic power radiated a red color around them. It drained their magic power to the point of exhaustion. "Be careful if you get caught, then you will suffer like them," said the thunder spirit. "Okay, I will destroy it immediately," Wardanas said loudly with determination. As soon as he finished speaking, the thunder spirit right next to him questioned harshly, "You are not allowed to use fire magic." Wardanas was shouted at by him. Lightning spirit stopped him because if anything happened he could burn the other students to death, but he ventured to ask the spirit if he would take action. The thunder spirit replied falteringly, "With my current situation, it was a bit difficult." The thunder spirit showed a weak appearance because of her small figure. Wardanas heard this and sighed helplessly. But there was still a way. It seemed he had just found some insight. Its finger-shaped lightning flashed. Pointing at Wardanas in front of him, "I will teach you a magic. You need that." Wardanas was also a bit surprised by this proposal. He was stunned for a moment. "What, isn't it more dangerous than the magic I just learned?" he asked Loy. He embarrassedly shouted at him, "Stop talking. I want you to imagine thunder the same way you did with the other elements." Lay's first words made Wardanas a little nervous. He sighed. "However, this time it's a little different in that you will imagine it falling from the sky." Wardanas was bewildered after hearing it. The magic circles overlapped layer by layer and shone brightly at their center. To use magic power needed to be concentrated at one point. However, the image of thunder was the complete opposite. Because lightning does not stay in one place, it splits into many rays after striking, so it is very suitable for the current situation. After the lightning strikes the ground and spreads to a large area, it will eliminate the target, underground. Contrary to magic, if the lightning splits in many directions, the worst situation can happen. Watanaz is a bit worried about using this magic, it's really dangerous. It's difficult to keep the lightning from separating like that, so I'll help you. The two thought thoughtfully with determination to save everyone. The staff began to emit light around it, which was the magical blue color of Watanaz. Next is the scene where he concentrates on following the chimpanzee's instructions, using his hand and staff combined with his imagination, pulling the spirit to stand behind him and look at him. In just a moment, lightning appeared. This was probably the magic that the lightning spirit had mentioned before. We did it, right? Watanaz was surprised by the result. Seeing that, the spirit couldn't help but be surprised. You did it. How did you do it? It wasn't that difficult, Watanaz replied. It turned out he had imagined the image of two batteries while doing it. Watanaz used his palm to control the lightning that had just been summoned. It seemed he was very talented in controlling it. Lightning gradually crept into each of Watanaz's fingers, focusing on the spell I am about to tell you. Although the spirit's magic is brutal and constantly changing, even a rookie mage can use it with Furkuntra's help. Watanaz was surrounded by glowing lightning, Furkuntra's low-level lightning magic. He was teaching Lihan the second circle magic. Thunder Spirit judged that the monster was in an unstable state due to many experiments. Thanks to that, it absorbed electricity very well, so this magic would be even more effective. Hearing that, Watanaz became more confident in performing this magic. I understand, I will perform it immediately. He held his staff towards the sky. Around the staff the first streaks of thunder began to appear curling around it. Yes, bring what he imagined into reality. The thunder spirit cheered him on. Right away, he immediately used his bravery to read out Furkuntra's spell, cast, and thunder. While the magical ritual was being performed, the thunder spirit felt something was wrong and paused for a moment. Perhaps something wrong was about to happen. In his hand was a glowing staff with many lightning swirls around it, waiting for too much magic concentrated in one place. Watanaz still ignored Thunder Spirit's words in his ears and continued to perform magic. This boy did not understand what he was doing. Thunder Spirit questioned him. The magic he created on the tip of his staff began to move and fly into the air. Where are the professors coming from right now? Is it this direction? The professor asked. Yes, before their eyes was a terrible scene, a huge monster rising from the ground with strange tendrils. Professor Garcia Kim saw the chaotic scene before them. They panicked and didn't understand what was going on. Oh my God, it has captured so many students. They stood from the ground looking up. All the students were wrapped around them by tendrils and drained of their magic power. The professor said, I will save them right away. Garcia Kim began to research the power enough to defeat that monster. She held her staff and prepared to perform magic to eliminate them. Before she could do it, she discovered something unusual. A glance up surprised her because she had just seen a streak of light in the sky. It was an extremely large thunderbolt with widespread power, lighting up the entire sky. This giant thunder thing began to gradually move towards the ground and created a huge shock. The light shone as bright as the sun. Clusters of monster trees growing from the ground were burned. All of them had to suffer the devastating force of lightning. This amount of magic power was so great that it surprised the witnesses. They stood to one side and were also blinded by the light. Garcia Kim was confused by the unbelievable power just now. What a terrible amount of magic power. She squinted her eyes at it. Each of the tentacles of the underground monster was burned by low-level lightning magic. They shriveled like dry tree branches and gradually withered and then slowly fell to the ground. Who could? The professor wondered. Before the professor's surprised eyes, the kidnapped students gradually fell from the top of the monster's tendrils. She quickly took out her staff and immediately used magic to save her students. The first rays of light came from Garcia Kim's cane. They were blue and gradually moved towards the students. The students who were falling at a sudden speed suddenly slowed down, which was because the rings of blue light surrounding them kept them weightless in the air. They began to slowly move down to the ground and landed safely. Was everyone okay? Were they injured anywhere? Professor Garcia Kim asked the students. Oh my God, Garcia Kim was surprised by the scene before her eyes. It was a monk student. He was affected by low-level lightning magic, so his whole body was blackened. His face and limbs were shaking. The expression on his face showed fear and horror. On the other side was the sight of Watanaz and the monsters. After being completely eliminated, burning like a pile of ash, it was burned, Watanaz said with satisfaction. Am I doing it right? I have a feeling you're not very focused. Watanaz asked the spirit. This is not my fault but your fault, the spirit answered angrily. I was wondering whose magic power it was, and as expected, it was Li Han. While Li Han heard the professor's words, he glanced over. Professor Garcia, they faced each other and exchanged surprised looks. Li Han saw the professor approaching and asked, "How are the arrested students? I'm also worried about the children, but there's no need to worry," the professor replied. Li Han heard a sigh of relief. He thought he had successfully overcome this problem. Immediately after, the professor smiled kindly and said, "They were just a little numb from the electric shock." As soon as he finished listening, his expression couldn't have been more awkward. His face was so bewildered that he didn't know what to say. The atmosphere was as quiet as Li Han's embarrassed silence. "Here, let me heal you guys," the professor said as he held out his magic stick and performed actions that caused blue streaks of light to appear around the stick. Li Han looked at the actions in bewilderment. Looking at the professor's reaction, it seemed nothing serious. Li Han calmly reassured himself. Furthermore, I didn't know that Professor Garcia could use healing magic, Li Han thought to himself. Usually professors don't know anything outside of their major. Blue streaks of light began to run around the professor's body like a ribbon, each feather falling to the ground as the students began to recover. They lifted each arm and leg and sat up with difficulty. "We are alive, thank you Professor Garcia." "Don't thank me, thank Li Han." Professor looked at Li Han with gratitude and admiration. He was the one who defeated the monster to save you guys. When they learned that the person who saved him was Li Han and not the professor, they were a bit surprised. Only then did they turn around immediately, because they had just received a rather painful electric shock from Li Han. Maybe they were very bitter this time. Li Han stood there looking at them and thought to himself, being electrocuted is an even worse injury than having magic power sucked out, so I understand why they are angry. Maybe Li Han hasn't been cool for long before his image as a male lead has already begun, turned off. Li Han stepped forward to say, "If you have any problems," before finishing your sentence, the monk students bowed their heads to thank Li Han. "Thank you Li Han." Li Han was a bit confused by this action of the mage student. It was indeed awkward, but for a knight, if I was helped and not thanked, it wouldn't be right, the mage student replied, with a look on his face. Even though he was a bit tearful, he was still shyly grateful to Li Han. Immediately everyone came and were grateful to Li Han. "Thank you for that, I can understand why Dorgyu believes in you so much." "Thank you Watanaz." This thank you made Watanaz a little touched. His face showed happiness. Not long after the seemingly rosy outlook, a sentence seemed to pierce Li Han's heart. "Of course I don't intend to consider you a friend, however I won't forget this. I cooperate best was on the lake mission." Maybe they wanted to repay Li Han for saving his life, so they wanted to offer to cooperate with him next time. "See you later." The monk student said goodbye to him and left. These people know how to draw boundaries, Li Han thought to himself. Professor Ogre Garcia Kim seemed curious. She wanted to approach Li Han to ask about him. "Li Han, can we talk about the lightning magic just now?" The thunder spirit standing next to him looked surprised. "It's time for you to explain." Watanaz turned to talk to his spirit, but the spirit seemed uneasy about this proposal. "Sorry, but the summoning time is almost over," Lightning Spirit replied seriously. "Looks like you have to deal with it yourself," the Thunder Spirit said to its owner. The professor standing on the side was a bit confused. "Next time I will show you my true power." As soon as he finished speaking, the Thunder Spirit disappeared into the air. The remaining pieces of light lingered for a bit and then disappeared. The disappearance of the Lightning Spirit left an awkward space between Watanaz and the professor. "Are you a user of lightning magic?" the professor asked. Faced with this question, Watanaz did not know how to explain. He wanted to tell her the story behind it. A foot stepped in front of Professor Garcia and Watanaz. They suddenly raised their eyes to look at that person. In his hand he held a fragment from the underground tendril monster, but it was burned and paralyzed by Watanaz's lightning. It turned out that it was Professor Volody. Perhaps he was standing behind witnessing everything. "Interesting," the professor said absent-mindedly. Watanaz saw the teacher. He looked trembling, scared and a bit awkward. A worried look appeared on his stiff face. "Wait, Professor Volody, why are you asking about lightning magic?" Professor Garcia Kim asked harshly. With one hand she stood up to protect Mr. Watanaz. "It is necessary for his teaching," the professor replied. She suddenly turned around and asked, "What, Li Han, does that mean I'm joining his class?" Yes, that was the answer that Professor Garcia Kim received for her question. She gasped. Her eyes turned into an O. Her mouth turned into an A. She stiffened and turned to stone. I respect every professor in this place to a certain extent, but Professor Volati's classes have gone beyond the limit, Garcia Kim thought worriedly. She thought they were too harsh for students to catch up with Professor Volati's lectures. The image of him in her imagination with his eyes burning like a fire seemed like a monster about to devour him, live all the students with his lesson plan. She looked at Watanaz with a worried look, and moreover, Li Han, a new recruit, was in his class. Li Han doesn't look like a veteran student, he really looks like a scholar who can face any danger. Feeling that Professor Gracia had some misunderstandings about him, Professor Vagrek stepped forward to ensure that Li Han could completely keep up with the teaching progress, which surprised teacher Gracia a bit. Professor Vagrek then talked more about Li Han's knowledge of magic, which helped him easily understand what the professor was teaching. Even last time, Li Han relied on himself to learn how to create a water shield. Indeed, Professor Vagrek was extremely appreciative of Li Han. He did not hesitate to praise Li Han for being so eager to learn that even he had to hold back. Saying this made Professor Gracia spray glue again. She looked at Li Han and silently blamed her fate. Look at the student who is so talented that he glows and is rushing headlong into an impossible class because of that same innate talent. Professor Gracia could only sigh. She couldn't keep Li Han if he could keep up with Professor Vagrek's class. Professor Gracia could only sadly give up on a genius like Li Han. Professor Gracia sadly told Professor Vagrek to take good care of him, but Professor Vagrek, still indifferent as usual, replied that he would not be biased, anyone. Unable to speak anymore, Professor Gracia's face turned a bit serious and she turned to wish Li Han good luck, looking at the professor as if wishing him safety in death. He also trembled, hoping the professor could say it all clearly. In return for Li Han's professor screams that echoed through the sky, there was only silence. Now he was probably staring and worrying about his fate in the next classes. Somewhere in the school, Guy Nandu and Ashan were holding a shopping basket. The two of them were walking somewhere side by side. Ashan looked at the basket in his hand and silently appreciated Li Han's kindness. One day they will definitely return the favor. Ashan turned around to praise Li Han and Guy Nandu. Li Han always gave them good things, so now they can go there and buy some delicious food for themselves. Talking about delicious food, Guy Nandu was not excited at all. He remembered the last time he visited the black market, there was very little good food there. Ashan could only comfort his friend, telling him a story. A few days ago, a large amount of food was imported from the black market. It seemed they had already traded with the Tiger Tower. Guy Nandu also just hummed, "Yeah, that's it." As soon as they arrived at the gate of the black market, an elf raised his hand to stop them. It seemed like he was in charge of checking those who passed through. That boy looked at the two of them and said, "Hello, everyone from the Tan Dragon Tower, nice to meet you," then introduced himself. He is Salko from the Tutana family. Ashan had heard the name of this family. They were very famous in the field of stone mining in the empire. Looking at the boy in front of him, Ashan was a little confused because that dwarf family was very good at manufacturing, but why was there an elf in this family? But Ashan still politely greeted him and introduced himself as Ashan comes from the Dalkad family. Ashan lifted the cloth covering the basket to reveal the potions stolen from Uregum's laboratory, then said his purpose was to exchange these potions for other things. As soon as Salko looked in, he was silent for a moment, as if he had realized something. Salko seriously apologized to them and then refused to trade, which made Guy Nandu and Ashan scream in surprise and ask why. While the two sides were arguing back and forth, Li Han was walking behind him, wondering why his friend was standing in front of the market gate and having a conflict with someone. As soon as they turned around, they saw him carrying a basket coming. The two of them quickly shouted, "Li Han!" Guy Nandu pointed at Salko and asked Li Han to talk to him because he refused to exchange clothes with them. Li Han went over and asked if it was true. Li Han very calmly asked Salko what the reason behind it was. He simply answered because the law required him to do so. Salko stood there and informed them of the new rule. They could not bring impure items. Li Han stood looking at this serious classmate and immediately understood. This student is probably the leader of the Turtle Tower. Not making things difficult for Salko anymore, Li Han lifted the towel and asked him if he could bring the vegetables harvested from his garden to the black market. Salko observed for a moment and then agreed. Li Han immediately turned around and promised to meet his two friends later. So the two people who were still enthusiastic and couldn't enter the gate just now had to stand and watch their friend enter so smoothly. Ashan couldn't bear it. Seeing classmate Li Han walk further and further away made Ashan believe that this time he could not repay him. Salco looked at Li Han's vegetable basket with some disbelief and asked if he really grew it. Do people from the Wardanas family also do these things? Li Han humbly replied, what does the family have to do with anything? I still divide the food. Eat for the people next to your tower. Hearing that his people were eating Li Han's food, Salco was a bit startled and asked why they didn't pay the fee. Just as Salco was about to return it for them, suddenly his stomach growled loudly without following Salco's control. Allowing himself to be so disrespectful in front of outsiders, Salco felt a little embarrassed, clutching his stomach and trying to explain. Li Han delicately selected a brilliant potato to offer to his classmates. He even advertised that it was delicious to the picky princess. Recalling Adenart's adorable potato-eating appearance, Li Han somewhat disagreed with the fan's nickname. She was clearly an easy eater. But that Salco rejected Li Han's good intentions because he had nothing of value in exchange, but Li Han didn't pay attention to those things and told Salco to just take it. It seems like Li Han has touched Salco's pride. He is a dwarf of the Tutana family and will not accept things without paying a fee. After saying that sentence, Salco turned around and left, leaving Li Han helpless, still holding the potato in his hand. Li Han stood there silently, a bit confused. Looking at the characteristic long ears swaying because its owner had to run away, Li Han wondered if Salco was an elf. At a market stall, Ratford respectfully greeted Li Han. As soon as they met, Ratford complained to his master about the new rules. Li Han had some questions that he wanted Ratford to tell. He said that the black market was growing due to Salco's leadership. At this point Ratford sighed again because there was a problem. Previously, two students had a fight with a friend over a lamp that cost 5 loaves of bread. The Green Goblin made a fuss demanding a return because the coffee was fake, but while the seller had made it clear before, it was simply a few students arguing with each other. Ratford added about the current state of the academy. If other towers start a war, the Turtle Tower will face many difficulties. That's why Salco, as the leader, came forward to solve this problem. Salco erected 2 large steelies in front of him to protect the Turtle Tower from the fighting of the other 2 towers. That is the strict rule. If you work, you will eat, otherwise you will have a belt and it is forbidden to bring stolen goods to exchange. Hearing this made Li Han angrily hit the table. Li Han angrily condemned the corrupt people for affecting other innocent students. Because of them, mixers like Li Han are about to lose their jobs and starve to death. Ratford also nodded in agreement. Then Ratford introduced something new when Li Han was not here. In the distance, there were 2 students intently looking at the pile of cards on Imirg's counter. Imirg simply introduced the rules of the game. There was a hex card in 3, she would turn them all over and then shuffle them again. If they could find them they would receive twice the bet. Li Han was a bit dumbfounded and wondered if it was okay to bet. Ratford said that even if he didn't like it, the law wouldn't prohibit it. In the blink of an eye, the student trying to bet screamed. He was in pain because he lost the loaf of bread that was his food for 3 days. Imirg seemed sorry and apologized, but he shuffled the cards quite slowly. But actually, Imirg has another card hidden in his hand to cheat. They all saw it. Ratford whispered and advised him not to play with Imirg. Li Han also agreed and praised that unique card-playing technique. While the two were discussing, Salco's voice rang out from behind, finally finding him Wadanaz. Li Han turned his head a little curiously. Salco brought 2 more people and hoped Li Han would confirm if these were the 2 people who ate his food without paying. Salco's expression looked a bit serious as he looked at Li Han. Scene change. Li Han said, "Oh, they are the people I cooked stewed tomatoes for before." He walked towards them. "Wait a minute, about that." The white-haired student waved his hand. "Not that I meant to blame him." He nodded slightly. "I'm here to apologize on behalf of my friends for their wrongdoing because living idle is a really thoughtless action. They wanted to repay them for what they had eaten, but their current situation was a bit difficult." Li Han refused. He felt it was evil to take it back from them, especially they weren't even from the Tiger Tower, or my tower. However, the other side cannot ignore this matter. The white-haired student pointed his thumb at himself and aggressively said, "I would return it in the name of my friend." Li Han asked how he planned to do that. He asked Li Han to go around the academy at night. There is useful information for Li Han. The white-haired student offered to meet Li Han tonight. He would tell Li Han everything. Scene change. Li Han walks up to meet him. Li Han followed that student. He looked around and there was no one there except the 2 of them. The other student lacked access to the 3rd floor of the main building on purpose to keep new students like us from knowing. In fact, every time we tried to go to the 3rd floor, the structure of the building changed, but our persistent efforts have borne fruit. There are a total of 5 corridors. I was sure I could see the stairs leading up here. Today they were blocked by the wall again. However, they found the solution. Li Han pondered for a while. This is when the right hour hand and minute hand point to an odd number. When the clouds cannot cover the moon. And for a moment he had to grip the wand tightly with his left hand. Those are the 3 conditions that need to be met. To open the hallway of the 3rd floor. A door suddenly opened. Li Han said as expected of a magic academy, "I wouldn't believe you if I didn't see it with my own eyes. It's amazing that you decoded everything." Li Han asked if you told me to come here just to say this. The other person shook his head. This was just preparation. He wanted to introduce Li Han to someone. Li Han curiously asked who it was. The other person couldn't say yet. Then Li Han will know soon. He was curious, not understanding anything. The student told Wardines I asked other students about what kind of person Li Han was. Li Han was slightly confused. He asked about him. He thought there was nothing good about the rumors surrounding him. Wait, Li Han thought maybe the person he wanted to introduce him to was. Suddenly, something appeared behind him, startling him. "This is," Li Han gasped, "a bunch of anti-magic." "That's right, this is a trap," the other student pointed straight at him. He shouted deathly Wardines. It turned out that it was just Li Han's imagination. "You looked around and things wouldn't turn out like that, right?" The other person asked what was going on. Li Han shook his head and asked what the rest of them said about me. The other guy said, "I heard you gave food to many other people, and I wanted you to stop doing that. Those who cannot find food or clothes for themselves will not know how precious they are." Li Han sighed softly. He was right. The friend asked Li Han if he agreed. Li Han replied that there was nothing wrong with that. Li Han closed his eyes and said that those who do not work do not know the value of labor, especially professors. My friend was a bit surprised. He clenched his fist. "Maybe I misunderstood him. Please forgive me." He put his finger to his nose and took a breath, then said that some people from the Tiger Tower said he was a heartless, cruel and brutal magician. I found those rumors to be true and false. Li Han thanked him for thinking they were fake. Li Han thought he didn't know what was going on, but he believes that he can fight to the end and confirm that the rumors are false. The two of them were standing in front of an extremely large stone statue. The statue depicts a person with long hair and eyes closed. Li Han looked at it for a while. It was a bit broken, but it was still a beautiful stone statue. He felt somewhat familiar. The friend next to him called his name. He asked if he saw how it cracked here. Last time he restored it, and after seeing it, he couldn't let it keep falling apart like that. Li Han wondered why it broke again. He was using a hammer to hit the statue again. It continued to crack even after I repaired it. The classmate picked up the hammer and banged it. The ground rumbled. A secret door opens here. Li Han was pushed inside alone. He swallowed his saliva and went inside. It was dark inside, so he walked slowly. He told Tutantha, "I believe in you." Tutantha nodded with relief. "You can just believe in me." Li Han took a deep breath. The steps gradually became faster. A bloodshot eye glowed. A new student has arrived again. Huh. Before Li Han's eyes is a monster with one body but consisting of 4 different animals. Li Han was curious what this was. The statue echoed, "Pleased to meet you, I am the statue of a forgotten monster. Student who came here to repair the statue, do you dare to swear not to tell anyone around you about me?" The statue questioned him. Li Han vowed not to say anything. He asked him what he was doing here. The monster statue wagged its tail. It was just killing time. The room it was guarding was sealed 187 years ago. He ventured to ask why I was not allowed to tell others about him. "Because the professors might force me to work again," the statue told him. Li Han laughed. "You're really wise. You heard that you know how to escape. You possess the wisdom you need." He asked him if he knew the location of a room located in the tower of the main castle. The statue hummed for a while. He said he knew there were 3 of them. Li Han enjoyed it in the end. Then, suddenly, it stomped its feet, but before that, "You must beat me in a race first," the monster said to Li Han. Li Han hesitated for a moment. It gives something. A chessboard appears. They play a game. Li Han sprayed glue and didn't know what to say. Scene change. Tutantha is using a hammer to carve another statue. He carved a small statue next to the large statue from before. He knew that the monster statue possessed ultimate chess skills, even he couldn't get a single point from it. Tutantha thought Watanaz would almost certainly lose. He thought he would have to comfort Li Han, he had to respect his pride. Suddenly, Tutantha turned around. Li Han is back. Tutantha sighed. He said he would guide Li Han until he defeated it. Whenever he wanted to challenge him again, he would tell Tutantha. Li Han didn't need to interrupt him. Li Han won. Tutantha was so shocked that he dropped the hammer he was holding in his hand. Li Han said that statue was worse than I thought. He said his skills weren't even as good as the foreign professor who lived next door to him. Of course, maybe that professor was super good. Tutantha didn't believe it. Really? Li Han nodded yes. He also told me that thanks to me he could finally sleep well. It's good that Tutantha's voice is low. He led Li Han back. He asked Li Han how he won. Tutantha wants to talk to you about the dwarf opening, the characteristics of the Tutantha family and the strategy of bringing the knight to f3 when the opponent has one of your pawns. Li Han laughed loudly and nodded in agreement. Scene change. On the way back, Li Han is tormented by Salco's chess stories. The next morning, Sunday, Li Han stood on the sandy shore. You see, this place is so big. He thought that skull-head master, I don't even know if he expected me to complete this mission. He looked through the water bottles he had collected, wondering if any of them could help him cross this lake. But all he had was royal wine and a bottle of eye medicine, both of which were useless. Last night, after Li Han returned, someone asked Gai Nandu, how did you create a low-level mana potion? Gai Nandu replied, cutting off the bottom part of the Garla Mardu and cutting the remaining part into parts about the length of 2 little finger knuckles. Right after that, you will have to cut the snow incense tree into thin pieces by hand. You have to do it quickly before the Garla Mardu dries. Next, Yoner interrupted. Li Han, look, this is a wise potion. It will make you smart just by drinking it. Li Han looked at the bottle Yoner held in his hand. He took the bottle. He asked Gai Nandu, what is 14 times 19, degree 417? Wrong, 2 people spray glue. The correct answer is 266. Li Han asked Gai Nandu to tell him again how to make a low-level mana water potion. Gai Nandu replied, cutting off the bottom part of Garla Mardu. And cut the remaining part into parts about the length of 2 little finger knuckles. Yoner shouted loudly, along with what? Okay, this is not wise water medicine. It is confident water medicine, not wise water medicine. All I have is just 3 bottles of that medicine water. Right now I don't have a jar of lust that is useful to me. The problem is this lake. Li Han thought to himself, can't he create a makeshift canoe with magic? There was a cautious sound behind him, and Li Han turned around. There was a sound behind the bushes. He curiously approached. No need to worry, okay, slowly put it down. There were 2 people with a big boat. The other said he had done this countless times back in his mother's hometown. A canoe. He hid behind a tree. Hey, the voice startled the other 2. Li Han held the stick and pointed at the 2 people in front. They fell to their knees and shouted loudly, you bastards. Are you planning to steal this boat from us? You can't steal Baphomet from me. I haven't even given you a name yet. Li Han slowly said, don't move. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. Why did he threaten them? You told the 2 they seemed to have misunderstood. I didn't come here to steal the boat, I just wanted to ask where it was going. They feel a little more secure, is that so? The monk student asked if he was interested in the boat I created. He laughed loudly and told Li Han to test drive it. Li Han was a little confused. So you did it yourself? I feel very uncertain about this. The 3 of them sat together on the boat. Li Han suddenly realized that this boat was quite sturdy. It did not leak water when there were many people sitting on the boat. Li Han continued to look at the other 2 guys, not believing that they would be so easily lured by him. Remembering that time, he pretended to doubt their skills. The 2 of them offered to look around to prove their honor. Li Han was also quite surprised when the 2 of them left one of them alone, like to go on a boat. Li Han's speculations were completely opposite to reality. He flashed a hope that the 3 would be friends. Li Han said that now let's determine the location of the island. Arango also agreed. Their boat is still moving smoothly. Li Han thought he needed a pair of binoculars. Suddenly he remembered Alrarlong's words. He once told you, a swordsman achieves certain levels will be able to use mana. Although it doesn't provide much magic, it strengthens the physical health of a person in danger. Li Han thought that if he was right then he could use it. And can enhance vision to find the island. Li Han used that power. An endless stream of bright blue light radiated from his body. Li Han has not yet reached the point where he can enhance certain organs, allowing him to mimic the effects. It was thanks to that power that he found it. He told the other two people that he had found the island. Everyone was bewildered after hearing the news and half doubting it. Li Han believes it was just luck, and now all three know the direction. He turned to look at the other two and was about to say something. They were afraid of the magical power radiating from Li Han, so they held a wooden sword in front of them. He was a little confused but received nothing in return. Li Han suggested that we have to go back. Everyone understood. Arango is still the one in charge of sailing. Even though he was feeling very tired, he still tried. He was worried at first but everything was fine. Arango tried to maintain his speed to return as soon as possible. Suddenly Arango stopped, making Li Han a bit confused. Arango hesitated as if he had just poked something. A small drop of water began to appear below. That drop of water reflected the image of the three of them. Li Han was worried when he felt that aura emanating. Somehow, the drop of water emitted shimmering light against the sky. Li Han realized it was a water spirit. The water spirit shot out powerful jets of water, creating a shower. The guy screamed in fear and turned to ask Arango what he had done. At that moment, confused, he could only apologize. Li Han was still standing. He couldn't tell from it that it was a high-level spirit. He thought the culprit who scared the water spirit was him, not Arango. Li Han reassured Arango to calm down and stand up, because Li Han needed his strength. Arango hesitated because he felt like Li Han didn't blame him. Arango still thought it was his fault. Then he pondered for a while. Li Han turned to look at Arango because everyone makes mistakes. It's important that we face them. Arango was touched by those words. Li Han ordered him to continue rowing. Hearing that, he immediately sat in position, both hands holding the oar firmly, showing that Li Han should give everything to him. He began to lightly glare at the water spirit. The spirit met that ice-cold gaze and immediately trembled all over. From the spirit's perspective, it feels so small when facing you. And was agitated by Li Han. It continued to emit bright light. Li Han was worried because he had a bad feeling. Around the three of them, other water bubbles began to appear. They all emerged from the water. The other two men were scared and hugged each other. Li Han was helplessly hunched over. The water spirits radiated identical light one after another. Li Han saw that the situation was at a disadvantage. He summoned a shield in front of him. The shield blocked a large amount of water at once, otherwise, there was no telling where their boat would have drifted. Li Han urgently called on the two people to quickly row the boat out of here. The two of them were still scared, but still very obedient. He ordered the two of them to row with all their might and not think about stopping. After that battle, the island returned to a peaceful scene. Arango was exhausted at this point, wondering if they were far enough away. Li Han felt it was probably okay. But something hesitated. And then their boat stopped on the golden sand. Because you thought we would go back but we ended up on the island. Indeed, the three of them in a wooden boat reached the island. Everyone is going inside. Arango turned his head to look at the boat and rubbed his hands because he was tired. So Arango suggested taking a break. Rowing was tiring, so Li Han agreed to let Arango rest. Arango with a tired expression said thank you. Meanwhile, there were voices praising that the sand on this island was very soft. The sand is so soft that it can sink at any time. And at the same time, his friend slowly sank down. When that happened, all three were panicked and surprised. Li Han stood motionless in place because he knew it was the principal's trap. In panic, Arango could only signal for everyone to run away from the sand, ignoring Li Han's warnings. And gradually Arango also sank. Each call for help was raised. Li Han with a very calm expression took out a gray ball, and thought that both of them were slow to react. He held it and let it fly straight into the air. And then found that the primary control could not be turned on. At that time, Li Han's hand held it tightly and also hoped to do some tricks. You will move the ball. Pieces of iron were cut horizontally and flew out. He walked rhythmically on the sand as if nothing had happened. The person flying up held the ball firmly in his hand. Li Han realized that he wanted to turn the ball around and use it to get out of the current situation. Meanwhile, the others were almost completely submerged in quicksand, so he could no longer freely use the ball. Li Han's whole body fell directly onto the large rock. At that moment, he was annoyed and realized that the boat was gradually lost in the sand, and so were the other two guys. The boat was also corroded by sand, so it was difficult to use the boat to escape. The next shock Li Han received looked at the shifting sand. From under the sand, something protruded. Slowly a pair of legs formed. He just stood there and witnessed it, but he was still stunned. A monster wearing brown gloves, with a large, muscular body, emerged from the sand, looking very scary. The monster complimented him, but with the unflattering implication that he was good at running away. Li Han thought that monster was undead, and that it was a trap for the principal. He politely bowed his head to greet him. Next, Li Han wondered what he was doing and what task he had come to assign. When he heard it finished, the monster wondered if he wasn't surprised at all, but then he had to stay calm. Knowing the question, even the undead admired him for asking, so it answered. And its main desire is to sink all three people into the sand to test their teammates. The monster even offered to let him inside because everyone was waiting. As soon as he agreed, Li Han immediately pulled out a brown wooden stick from his hand. Li Han raised the wooden stick at the undead and ordered the iron ball to go. The monster was hit in the head with a ball but did not react. Then it just fell to the ground. At that time he was angry because he didn't understand what he had just done. Li Han immediately bowed his head to admit his mistake, making undead surprised with his attitude right now. Meanwhile, it ordered him to go. Each heavy and ferocious step continued. This time it was actually hit by something. Li Han continued to swing the wooden stick again, making the monster really angry because he was toying with him. Hearing the scolding, he stood dumbfounded. Li Han pondered for a while. Instead of trusting his teammates, he would rather defeat them. He started chanting the spell. The monster was surprised why this Li Han could know its spell and thought he stole it. He thought that he didn't even want to learn that magic, and shouted loudly and began to rush forward. The monster raised its arms to fight, thinking he was a nuisance. The undead recognized his move and immediately took advantage of it. He thought that for a new student, his thinking was bold. And that's all it took to look down on him. At this moment, its body emitted bright red fire. The monster's angry fire had covered everything around. Li Han came to this island like a mouse caught in a trap and could not escape. The spike was released slowly. Make it crash into you. Undead always provokes you to not run away, blaming you for absorbing its mana. At that time, Li Han pulled out the sword called Morning Star. The sword is made from black magic stone. In such a situation it has the ability to absorb mana.